into it. So I'm Nima. I'm one of the co-founders of Pairmill. We are a performance marketing agency. We help brands scale on paid search and paid social. And we're what we call a full stack agency. So we try to help folks from media buying all the way to conversion and attribution modeling, creative production as well. Today, we're going to walk you all through the process that we use to figure out how to iterate on creative. So we've got Mary here from our creative team. She's one of my co-founders. She was the creative team, and then now she's a team that does this work. And we're going to focus on meta specifically, and so we'll get into it. But one of the things I wanted to mention is if you are curious about how we do this on the media buying side, I'm going to leave a link of a past webinar we have done that walks you through the ad operations part of this. How do we actually run these tests? How do we structure these tests in a way that we're able to learn from them? And today we're going to focus on the approach that we're going to use from the data in order to sort of extrapolate learnings and iterate on them. And so without further ado, Mary, do you want to say hi and get started?
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. This is actually the second time we're doing this. So if you've been to the previous webinar, there's probably not going to be much new information for you to learn. But if you haven't, I hope you enjoy it and I hope you learn a lot of new things. Nima, are you still here? How do I...
Yeah, I'm here. I just made you the spotlight.
How do I share
your screen?
Screen, yeah. Suddenly disappeared.
Oh.
Are you sharing your screen still?
No.
All right, found it. Cool. So today we're going to discuss the art and science of ad creative tests on Meta. By the way, a lot of the strategy that we're going to be discussing today is relevant not just for Meta, but actually for TikTok, Pinterest, Snapchat. A lot of these platforms have tons of similarities. And as we're not going to be going into the particulars of the things that are working or the learnings that we know are working for this particular platform, you can take a lot of this information and try this out on other channels. So what we're going to go through today, we're going to discuss two potential goals that cover two of the major scenarios you might have when you're running creative tests on Meta. We're going to go through two major types of tests that you can run when you're running creative tests, and we usually recommend running them in sequence. And finally, how to run the creative analysis once you get the results of the creative tests. So let's start with the goals. Usually, you have two potential scenarios when you're running a creative test. The first scenario is you want to maximize the return from this test. And this works in case where you're just starting on a channel and you want to know if it's viable at all. And you want to get the winners as fast as possible. The first scenario also works for the case where maybe your channel is currently in a rut and you need some winners as soon as possible, just to get your budget diverted to some ads that are actually performing. So that's number one. And number two is when you're building a sustainable creative strategy, where you're looking for actual learnings and you're trying to build something that can scale, that can take you to the new levels of spend and of returns. So let's talk about the first one. When you're trying to find out if the channel is viable, and that works for the case where you're starting anew altogether, where you haven't run any ads before at all, and for the case when you have run ads on other channels before. This is not the time for you to prioritize learnings. This is not the time to run many iterations of the same idea. And definitely not the time to run A/B tests, which we just in general don't recommend. This is the time to compile the most compelling, the most competitive ideas into a laconic, small creative round that is as diverse as possible. So how do we go about building this creative round? What we recommend the most is to start with research. Now, of course, you'll have the temptation when you're starting on a new channel to jump on trends, to go for the ideas that you have had in your mind for a while and you're so passionate about them and you really want to try them. But if you want to find a diversity in your first creative round, you want to be informed about the ideas and the concepts and approaches that are working on the platform or working for your competitors, working within your industry. And we highly recommend to do a very thorough research before you start compiling your ideas. Again, you might have a temptation to just jump into the meta ad library, look for your competitors and copy the ideas that they are running, especially the new ideas that they have just launched that might look very exciting, that maybe have some trends that people are jumping on TikTok for. We do not recommend to do that. Firstly, I want to highlight that the main point of research is not for you to find the ideas that you can copy from your competitors. The point of the research is to find the underlying components and topics that work just on the platform where you're starting. So, of course, you should look at what your competitors are doing, but that doesn't mean that you should simply copy whatever they've launched recently. It means that you should run a detailed analysis and try to find the things that led to the success in their ads. So other than like the first tactic that we recommend, other than searching for particular companies, especially your competitors within the meta ad library, you can look for various keywords. And by the way, I recommend to look not just for ads that are run in the United States, but also for ads that are run in other countries, and maybe just put the toggle for all countries, like the worldwide research. And you might find a lot of exciting results. And you can look for keywords that are relevant to your product or service, or keywords that are just somewhat adjacent to it. And you will find a lot of ideas that are run maybe by smaller companies. Because once again, it's always more exciting to see the ads that were produced with a bigger budget by bigger companies, but you might not be able to learn much from them. The place where you can learn the most is the smaller companies that have to be really nimble, really flexible, that have smaller budgets, and they might have really creative ideas that you could implement for yourself. The second tactic is, once you're looking for those ads within the ad library, look at the ads that have been running for the longest time. You don't want to be inspired yet by the ads that have been run very recently, because they might not be successful. They might get switched off very soon, and then you would have wasted the effort. You want to look for the ads that have been that have had a lot of iterations. And then again, you don't want to simply copy whatever they have been running for a long time. You want to analyze the ad, dissect it into various components, and see the piece that is repeating the most, and then try to find an answer to why you think this particular piece is performing, or we assume is performing, because of course we can only assume in cases like these. And you should compare it with other ads that don't have iterations within the same account, trying to find the differences. And once you have your hypotheses about what is working and why, then you can start thinking about how to implement those hypotheses into your own ideas and concepts. Of course, you can look up ads on TikTok. TikTok has its own ad library. You can look at things there. The process is the same as on Meta Ad Library. At this stage, we don't recommend looking at organic content on TikTok. It's certainly more exciting, and the ads on TikTok already use some of the trends that are currently hot on organic content. But organic content trends tend to be a hit or miss when you're experimenting with your ads. And so for the first rounds, for the tests, when you're trying to maximize your bets, trying to maximize the potential of your ads, this is not the time for that. And then once you're running that analysis, trying to find the reasons why things are working, again, try to not look at the ad as this whole video. You definitely don't want to look at the creator that they have in an ad and then just try to find that same creator for your product or service. You want to switch on your empathy and try to put yourself in the place of the audience that is watching these ads, that is consuming this content, and try to understand what is it that sticks out to them. And then you need to find as many patterns as possible that unite these oldest ads or these pieces of content that stood out to you, and you start there. So some of the examples of what you might find, if we look at these ads from Calm, you might see that for their video content, they're using hooks always in the font that is native to the platform. It is generally the best practice for Meta and for TikTok, and it always stays at the top. So this is the learning or the hypothesis you might have about the composition, the design of an ad. Then you might look at the vibe of an ad. You might see that they're using ASMR videos. And this, coincidentally, is the thing that works not just for mental health apps or mental health companies. ASMR videos within the hook, within the first 3 seconds, tend to work for a lot of brands. So that's one of the surprising learnings that we've had once we've tested it. So it's super exciting, led us to a lot of new, interesting directions. And then, again, in terms of design, you might see that they highlight stats and other pieces of text with different colors so that they stand out more, so that people memorize them more. And you might try that for yourself. You should keep in mind, as you're running that analysis, that their audience might be different to your audience. So it's important to try and be inspired in your research by the brands that might have a similar target demographic. And I'm not saying they should have the exact same product or exact same service, just kind of a similar age, the similar preferences, the similar interests. Because as we have learned in the past, even people of different ages have vastly different preferences for design and for pacing, for a lot of other elements in the ads. And you don't want to start with the learnings that are irrelevant to your audience. Then another research tactic that is severely underutilized and that I highly recommend is looking at your competitors and other companies' GDN ads for copy inspiration. So GDN is the Google Display ads. I specifically don't recommend looking at YouTube ads. They're an entirely different beast, and they tend to be like a mix of YouTube and Meta ads. They might just confuse you in your hypotheses. GDN ads, on the other hand, can come extremely useful because they have a very limited space, limited amount of time to get people's attention. And you will see that a lot of companies find very creative solutions in presenting their ideas and their value propositions within those ads. To give you an example, unfortunately, you can't see it here in the screenshot, but Grammarly used to use this trick in their ads, or this approach, where they would write a headline and then they would intentionally make a spelling mistake within the headline and then correct it straight away to show how Grammarly operates and how their software works and what it does. So the inspiration here is obviously not to make spelling mistakes in your ads, but to show problem and solution within one simple static ad. And if you were to extrapolate that hypothesis, you could, for example, if you have a cleaning company, maybe you can show something getting dirty and then cleaned up behind the text or on top of the text within the same ad, within just a static space. And finally, I can't avoid talking about our newsletter that you can find on the website, which you can see all the ads that we have featured over the past few years. You can search by industry, by the type of the ad, and you can also find a lot of inspiring stuff there. And to round it up, once you have found your inspiring pieces of content, the best strategy is just to go with your gut and pick 5-7 ads. You don't want to create too many ads straight away, but they have to be as diverse as possible. So this is an example that would feature very different formats for Hopper, for instance, where you get some UGC, you get some animation, you get some content that looks organic, you get some illustration. Sorry, this dog is annoying. And you have some screenshots that look like they were taken off Twitter or some other organic platform. So around it looks like this. This is the diversity that you're aspiring to have. Of course, now we're leaning more towards UGC in a lot of our best efforts, in a lot of our content. So you could diversify it just through UGC. It doesn't have to be animation or static ads. But in that case, you should make sure that your UGC is as diverse as possible, to use different creators, different hooks, different types of value propositions. And then, yes, you shouldn't be looking for a unifying theme for them. They can be all sorts of different concepts. In future, when you're looking to build a sustainable strategy, you should prioritize the learnings and you should be thoughtful about the unifying themes in your rounds. So for the second scenario, this is the time where you have tested that the channel is viable. You hopefully have reached some goal, CPA or whatever you're optimizing for. And now you want to get the learnings that can't be extrapolated. Very often, even within a successfully working channel, you will get a situation where you just jump from one successful ad to another successful ad that takes over the budget, and you don't really know why they're working, why some of their iterations aren't working, and if suddenly they get fatigued, you have no idea how to replace them. So in order to avoid that, you should build a creative strategy that is sustainable, where you consistently get the learnings and you consistently analyze your creative rounds. Okay, so let's talk about how we did it. So first, we highly recommend that you start by testing value propositions. Again, it's harder to do if you're diving straight into the UGC, but this is where we usually try to start for most of our clients. And The best way to test the value propositions is to be as specific as possible. So, for example, if you're talking about saving time, this is a very abstract, big value proposition. You don't have to use literally the words save time. You can come up with a narrative, you can come up with a sentence and a story that features this value proposition. Or if you're talking about improving performance, you can and you should use stats as much as possible and show by how much instead of talking about it in abstract terms. And you can make these value propositions, their execution a bit more complicated. You can weave them into a narrative. You can introduce them into a funny or interesting script. But ultimately, you should know what is the actual value proposition that you're talking about within that script. The other option is to turn your value propositions into metaphors or analogies. That also tends to work really well. People are visual creatures, and metaphors help us imagine the value or the utility of your product or your service much better than they would in simple text. So how do we test the value propositions? The easiest way to get clean learnings when testing value propositions is with static ads. Now, again, for some products, for some companies, it's at this stage where video content is prioritized everywhere on every platform, it's much harder to test them, but we still recommend it if it's at all possible for you. And the reason is that within a video ad, if your videos change even a little bit, it's so hard to figure out with all the blend of different components of different happenings to figure out why an ad, like why a particular ad is performing better than others. And when you're starting your learnings, you want to be as certain as possible that the value propositions that you're choosing are the ones that resonate the most with people. Within a static ad, it's done much easier, and you can have that certainty that can help you move further into other formats. So as an example, you can see these iterations of basically the same ads by Zero, where they test different kinds of copy while showing interface and basically having the same or very similar design. If you have compiled around like this, then once you get a clear winner, you can be sure that this is the kind of copy and the kind of value proposition that resonates the most with your audience. And then you can use it further to introduce it into more complicated scripts. Another way to test value propositions is, of course, with hooks in video ads. Now, this works to deliver you clean learnings in a case where the only difference between your ads is the hook. Nothing else changes. So as an example, you can see these ads from pros, where these would be the exact same videos, but the hook and the copy that is shown in the first 3 seconds differs. By the way, as a small tip, if you're working with UGC creators, we found it very useful to ask them to record a few different hooks in addition to whatever else you're asking them to record, so that later on you can use them if the ad is successful, or even straight away if you have the budget for that, or if it follows your strategy. Now, of course, you want to find the best performing hooks and to know the exact wording that works. But in addition to that, and this falls more into the analysis stage, but you want to think about the analysis as you're compiling your round, as you're thinking about the ideas, because we're always trying to understand our audience. We're always trying to understand why they're clicking on the ads, why something resonates with them. And so through your hooks, through these tests of value propositions, you're thinking simultaneously about various hypotheses for something that maybe resonates with your more mature audience and what they want to see. Something that resonates with people, like in case with pros, people who want to keep their hair longer, who struggled in growing out their hair. What kind of language, what kind of vibe, what kind of type of creator that they're looking for. And once you find those things, once you find those answers, you won't just have the exact lines, the exact hooks that work so that you can replicate them further. If you know the reasons people respond to these things, then the space for iterations is limitless. And ultimately, we're trying to achieve a stage in which we know our target audience the way we would know our best friend. We know what they're into, we know what puts them off, we know what resonates with them, because this is like a never-ending conversation that you're having with them. And you want to always be pushing something that resonates with them. And then certainly testing value propositions goes very much hand in hand with how they're presenting, how they're being presented. So as you're coming up with your hypotheses and as you're analyzing the results, you should pay attention not just to kind of raw data like the text, the type of creator, the length of the ad, but also to things that are more subtle, like the type of humor, the preferred language, maybe the interests or the background, the lighting. So many things change the performance of an ad. And the second stage, after you've tested your value propositions and you have some certainty, some confidence in the reasons the people click that are related directly to your product or your service, the next stage is testing these best performing value propositions with different types of art direction. Now, this is the part that is obviously more art than science. There are so many things you can test for each of the well-performing value propositions. And some of the art direction tests might be significant, some of them might not be. So I'll go through a few that you should consider and some others that maybe might divert your budget towards unnecessary tests. So significant art direction tests relate to what is essentially the vibe of your ad. But more specifically, this is the type of lighting, the music, the voice of the creator, the way they present themselves, the environment in which they are, how dark it is, how light it is. You can imagine that if someone is shooting your product from what looks like a dungeon and it's really dark and it's depressing, no matter how compelling your value proposition is, it's not going to work particularly well. On the other hand, if you have bright colors, if the pace of the video is dynamic, if you have tested some design compositions and you found the ones that are more minimal and more optimal for this piece of content, this all changes the perception of the viewer. Some of the insignificant art direction tests, they often fall into what is exactly on brand and what feels like on brand for the company. And if that is exceptionally important to you, if branding is paramount for the values of your company, then of course you should look into all of these tests as well, or just stick to whatever you believe is important. But just so you know, running tests about moving your logo a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, making it slightly larger, changing the colors by just a few shades that doesn't really change the perception of the viewer much. Marginal changes in the leading and tracking, especially the spacing between the letters in the text or in the lines, it's not going to affect the viewer as much. It's just for you and for your brand. And we definitely don't recommend to run specific tests that divert the budget and just test different things like how large the logo should be. And the other incredibly insignificant test is testing the types of CTA buttons at the end of the video. Generally speaking, you probably already know if you run any tests on Meta at all, the first 3 seconds, the first 5 seconds is what matters the most. Most people will not pay attention all the way to the end of your ad, even if they watch it until the end. And they will definitely not remember what is at the end of the video unless it's bizarre, outlandish, funny. As long as your CTA button or your call to action is straightforward, that's all you need. It doesn't matter how you change the wording in the end, how big your CTA button is. No one pays attention to that. So let me walk you through some of our past examples of conclusive art direction tests that are very simple, that test only 1 or 2 things at a time, and that have resulted in the difference in the CPA, which is what we were optimizing for, more than 2 times, more than 3 times in some cases. One example being Recess. They had some really cool colors, and this is a very simple test that surprisingly for some people delivers exceedingly different results. You can change just the background or just the color of the product while keeping everything else the same, and you get very, very different results. And then once you get that learning, you know that, for instance, in this case, that warmer colors resonate with the audience more. And then once you learn that, you lean into that, and you know not to waste your budget on cooler palettes. Here's another example where we tested the design composition of the ad. Everything else remained the same, and we had a very clear winner. And then that led us to further tests that cut out essentially the irrelevant compositions that didn't resonate with the audience. Here's another test that we ran for Elevate. It's exactly the same concept. It's showing the copy or the headline seemingly in a real world environment, which is, by the way, a popular trend still. And this ad resulted in significantly better results and led us to test further concepts and further ideas with handwriting, which led us to tests within the video ads. We frequently write on the most bizarre objects, the strangest surfaces. As long as it's handwritten, a lot of these perform really well. And it all started with this test. This is a more complicated test for art direction, where we tested a more subtle, natural lighting with bolder colors, bolder fonts. This ad on the right performed much better. And so that opened a new direction for us in which we played more with natural lights and more subtle colors, more subtle presentation of the product. So ultimately, when you're running your art direction tests, when you're planning your future test, you should try and go outside of your comfort zone. I know that it's hard to test things that maybe don't vibe with you personally, but if you're trying to achieve the best results for your ROAS, for your CPA, whatever you're optimizing for, ultimately advertising is about making money as much as it is about making aesthetic, beautiful things. And you might really want to test things that you personally don't find attractive, but your audience might. And so then you have a choice about what to do with those learnings. Now we're coming to a final stage about analyzing the data that comes from our creative learnings. This is usually the part that people enjoy the least, especially creative teams, but we highly recommend for every member of the creative team to know at least the basics about how to analyze the creative tests. Because when someone who created the ad or someone who participated in creating the ad is looking at the numbers, at the results, they might spot things that someone who's just going into Meta or some other library and launching those ads and dealing with the structure might not notice. And mostly you want your team to be looking at just the basic numbers. You don't want them to get bogged down into tiny details. And obviously the things that you should be looking out for are mainly the metric you're optimizing for. So usually it's CPA, ROAS, or cost per lead, right? You're looking at the number of the events that happened. You don't want to be paying too much attention or analyzing too deeply the things that didn't achieve statistical significance, where you didn't get as many results, no matter how wonderful they seemingly are. And then you still want to be looking at the CTR. You don't want to be looking at it exclusively, but how clickable your ad is still important, and you should take that into consideration. So here's how we look at these metrics. Here are some of the main 4 cases that you might have, and here's what we usually ask ourselves once we achieve these pairings. The first one, obviously, is the best one, where you have the low CPA and the high CTR together. So this means your hypothesis was successful. You should iterate on this ad further. Probably most of the things work really well about this ad, and you should continue to test this further, but celebrate your success. The second scenario is you get the high CPA and the high CTR together. So in this case, you want to see what went wrong along the journey that your audience goes through. Because if a lot of them clicked on the ad, something must have resonated. But if they stopped before actually purchasing the product or doing the action that you want them to perform, you should ask yourself if maybe the ad was misleading, maybe it had unclear information, maybe it was too clickbaity, maybe it didn't get to the point fast enough. You definitely want to ask those questions, especially if they're leading you to some changes within the landing page. The third scenario is low CPA and low CTR. So this usually means that you have the cohesive flow between your landing page and your creative, but maybe your ad is not engaging enough. Maybe you needed to move faster. Maybe you need bolder hooks. Maybe you need to introduce some humor. This scenario opens up the space for a lot of experiments, because you can still iterate on this ad. You can still use it as a foundation, but you know that there's a lot of other stuff you could do and try to make it perform better. And then finally, the worst scenario, which is easy to discard, especially if you're taking these results to heart and maybe you participated in the ideas and the creation of the ads. But this is the scenario in which you should look into the ads that are the worst performers the hardest, because you don't want to make the same mistakes again. And if you have derived some hypotheses out of these worst performers and you test them again, you will have, in the same way that you want to have various elements that move your ads towards good performers, you will have certain elements, like a cluster of different things that you want to avoid at all cost. And you should definitely try to understand what they are as early as possible, because so much budget can be diverted and wasted by making very simple mistakes that could be avoided. Like, giving you an example, like we discussed that more mature and younger audiences resonate to find attractive different kinds of design. This is a very simple change that you could make to your ad. And if you learn that your audience responds to a particular design better than to others, this saves you a lot of money. Usually the best practice is that the younger your audience is, the smaller the text should be within your ad. The older your audience is, the larger you want the words to be. It's such a simple change. It's so easy to discard and not think about. But if you test it a few times, you will notice how different the results are. And if you don't pay attention to this little detail, if you haven't cemented it as a learning for your account, then you will continue to lose money every time you use essentially the wrong font size. So once you've accumulated all these learnings, now to repeat, you want to have learnings about various elements of the ad, you want to have the learnings about the vibe, you want to have the learnings about the value props. What do you do with them next? How do you iterate on them further? Well, firstly, you want to systematize them as much as possible. And this will lean into your taste for organization. You might want to keep it in Figma, the way we do. It's more visual. You can keep the screenshots, zoom in, zoom out. It provides you ample amount of space. And you can have notes for every screenshot. You can have it in different columns, essentially design it in the exact way that you absorb information the best. And you definitely want to systematize these learnings in some way, because if you have new members joining your team, or you simply want to remember what happened a year ago, because ideally, of course, you're running your ads for a long time, you don't want to repeat the same ideas, to repeat the same mistakes, to run the tests that you have run before in the exact same way. So you should try and put it all together and refer to it and continuously update it. And certainly this will help you come up with new hypotheses in a more informed way, so that you're not just coming up with entirely new ideas that are not based in your past learnings, but you're finding ways to create iterations of things that you have already tested and already know to perform well. The other way you can use these learnings is just to continuously make your learnings more granular. Again, talking about the text and its size and its presentation, you can test the exact size that is optimal for the content that works best for you. Especially if you've already tested everything else, you might as well. You might test different kinds of creators. You might test different colors, different soundtracks. You'd be surprised how much the music changes the performance of an ad, and that provides you like almost a limitless amount of space to play with. And then, of course, you can test these learnings on other channels. And you shouldn't be testing the exact ads from one channel to another channel. You can, of course, and you'll get some learnings, but there are specifics within each platform for best practices. So this is why, same as within your research, you should focus on the learnings and the data that you have collected, and not the exact pieces of content or the exact ads that you have run on one platform and just put them on another platform. The learnings usually extrapolate from platform to platform. The exact ads, not so much. It's a hit and miss. And finally, as you're assembling all these learnings, you should keep in mind that you're interacting with real people. They grow, their tastes change, their preferences change. the trends on the internet and just within the real life change. And so you should pay attention. You should care about their reactions. You should care about the comments they leave for your content. And like in case with this ad that we created a while ago, sometimes responding to one of the comments from your audience within your ad is the best way to show that you care about what they think about your product or your service. And people truly appreciate that. And this also serves to further your brand marketing as it does your paid social marketing. And that is all I wanted to say on the topic. Thank you very much for
Awesome.
listening again. Should we start answering some questions if we have any?
Yeah, there's one. It's an interesting one. So, the question is: I recently read that about 70% of people watch ads on mute. Does music still matter?
Interesting. I don't know if that's true. On Meta, perhaps. On TikTok, it is impossible. And even on Meta, you have Facebook and Instagram. And Instagram will often start the sound for you, especially in the stories format. So it depends. I would say, yes, the music still matters. But that is the reason you should have subtitles. Because if your ad is impossible to digest without sound, then of course it's not going to work. You should account for at least some people watching things on mute. But music still matters because for people who do watch with sound, it changes the dynamic, and you should definitely align your video editing on par with the music. Especially if you have any sort of percussion, you want the transition to happen aligned with the music and with the percussions that are happening. So yes, I'm curious about the 70% where the stat is coming from. I would be surprised if it's the case for across the board for all of the Meta platform.
Yeah, it probably matters on the placement. Like if that's on Reels or in TikTok, it's just people that have their sound on.
Yeah.
Our next question is, does budget impact how many creative versions you should test?
I see this question disappeared. Yes, of course, it impacts that. How many creative versions? If you're talking about iterations of the same concept, this goes back to what we discussed, the goals that you have for your tests. Generally, we try not to go over 10 ads within one creative test unless your budget is absolutely humongous, because it's just much harder to analyze the results. And no matter how big your budget is, it will still take time for each ad to get enough spent for you to get conclusive learnings and conclusive results. So it's best to divide your creative rounds if you have many ads to test, or if you're testing so many versions that you don't really know which one to begin with, maybe you should be a bit more selective with the concepts and cut them out according to your past learnings or just your gut, whatever you think is going to perform.
Yeah, and I'll add that the link I put in the chat for our past webinar describes how we think about how much budget you put behind each creative test and how long we wait until we are comfortable deducing if the test was successful or not. But to give you a heuristic, what you want to be going for is a minimum number of conversions that are deep in the funnel, ideally all the way to sort of revenue if you can, and use that as the benchmark for how many conversions you want to see per ad, and then allocate enough budget that you could get there. And always have a benchmark ad from your existing ad spend in creative tests, so then you can have a fair comparison. There's a lot more information about how we do this and how we design our tests in the other webinar if you're curious. All right, the next question is, on what platforms are you able to see a consolidated view of competitor ads? Are there special service platforms, or is it just within Google/Meta ads?
Yeah, I wish there was a platform that combined them all together. Generally, yeah, we look just at the native platforms. There are some services for that. Foreplay is one of them. We also have our internal product that we're building that subscribes you to your competitors' ads. But as we discussed, you don't want to be looking just at the newer ads. You want to know what your competitors are doing, but your creative rounds should be informed by the older ads as well, and just kind of the overall state of the account of your competitors and other companies in your industry.
Yeah, this is like an interesting problem for a lot of marketers. We have an internal tool for aggregating all your competitors' meta ads in one place, but we haven't gone to all the different channels yet on it. And eventually we want users for that product externally as well. So if you're interested, feel free to email us. All right, next question is, any specific ad formats or types to consider for the first scenario where we want to test a lot of different ones? Example, comparison before and after.
Yeah, those are good ones if they are relevant to your product or service. I can't really pinpoint specific formats without knowing what your company or your brand does. For e-commerce, for instance, maybe testing static formats or comparisons is not going to be the best idea. You probably will want to start with UGC and different hooks. If you're in SaaS or in B2B, in that case, yes, before after tends to work really well, and other kinds of comparisons in general. So it depends. But I should also mention probably that as you're researching the inspiration for your the scenario where you want to diversify your creative round, you should look at some of the really boring companies and what they're doing, because if your product is really exciting, it's much easier to find a format that works. Usually just a straightforward testimonial will work if the product is super cool. But if you're advertising for, I don't know, accounting software, that's when people need to get really creative in order to stay competitive. And so if you're diversifying your strategy in the early stages, try to look at what the boring companies are doing.
I'm sure you offended some people by calling financial software boring.
I'm so sorry, but
Makes sense. All right, that was all the questions. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for staying on, and hopefully this was really helpful. We're going to send over a recording of this and the slides over, and we usually try to do an interesting webinar once a month. So we'll also follow up with any topics that are coming up in the next few weeks. Thank you so much.
thank you.